بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Well, Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to resume our study of theory of knowledge or epistemology. We had
Excuse me.
yes.
Mr. Alizadeh joins the last passage.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I am going to start with a review of what we discussed last week. It's very important to master these issues because we keep referring to them. So please also study yourself, do mubahatha, if possible study other books so that you really grasp these issues. As you remember, we said knowledge is either ilm huzuri or ilm husuli, knowledge by presence or conceptual knowledge. Ilm husuli is also divided to tasawwur or mafhum and tasdiq. And then we said tasawwur or mafhum conception is either kulli or juz'i, universal or particular. We said those concepts which are particular are either hissi or khayali. Hissi is when we understand something through our senses, five senses. There is connection with the external world, and because of that, concept which by itself is kulli becomes juz'i. Concepts are always by themselves kulli, universal. It's only existence which can make something particular. So when I am seeing something, I am connecting myself to the existence of that thing, therefore it's juz'i. Or if I close my eyes and remember what I was seeing, this is khayali, this is stored in my memory, but it's continuation of connection with the existence. So this is also juz'i. About mafaahim kulli, we have to review quickly a few things. We said by definition we mean by kulli a concept which can be applied to more than one. ما لا يمتنع فرض صدقه على كثيرين. It's not impossible to be applied to more than one. It doesn't need to actually apply to more than one. Maybe right now it has only one instance, like wajibul wujud. Mafhum wajibul wujud kulliyun. The concept of necessary being is universal, even though it has only one instance, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes even may not have any instance. Maybe there is a kulli that today there has no instance, like dinosaur. Is kulli, is universal, but has no instance. Sometimes maybe it's even impossible to have instance, like sharikul bari. Sharikul bari mafhumun kulliyun la yumkin an yakuna lahu mistaq, is a universal concept which cannot have any instance. But still it's kulli, because as such it can be applied to more than one. If you can have 10, 100,000 sharikul, if you imagine, this mafhum can be applied to all of them. So this is مفهوم كلي. مفهوم كلي, it is an invention or you can say, a work, a product of عقل, human reason or intellect. Because we don't have kulli outside. Anything outside us, is a being. And being by itself, it has tashakhus, is one. So kulli is what aql produces. It's a way of understanding, of course. So aql understands kulliyat, and aql can make kulliyat, but not by fabrication and by false production. No, it means it's a way of aql analyzing, conceptualizing realities of the world. So for example, what we have outside is Zayd, Amr and Bakr. We have people, we have individuals, but Aql finds among them universal concepts. For example, says they are all Zayd and Bakr, they are all human beings. So the kulli, mafhum of insan is kulli, but you cannot find this mafhum kulli outside directly. Yes, you can find it by analytical assessment of outside. Or you say they are mumkin. You say Zayd, Amr, Bakr, that flower, that desk, they are all, for example, contingent. This is the work of aql, but not like imagination in the sense that it's just fabrication. No, it's the work of aql in an attempt to make sense of the world, of the realities, to understand by classification, etc. We said then mafahim kulli are three, and we said this is one of the great achievements of Muslim philosophers, that they have divided universal concepts into al-mafaahim al-maahuwiyyah or al-ma'qulat al-ula, the primary intelligibles, or you can call them the first intelligibles, or concepts which are related to quidities. All maqulat ashr, those who don't know that much Arabic, maybe they find it difficult to distinguish between ma'qulat and maqulat, but I try to explain. We were talking about al-maqulat al-ula. Al-maqulat al-ula means the first intelligibles. Ma'qul, what can be understood by aql, is kulli. So this is maqulat ula and maqulat thaniya, which by itself is divided to mantiqi and falsafi. So logical secondary intelligibles or philosophical secondary intelligibles, in contrast to primary intelligibles. Okay, this is ma'qul from aql, means something which is understood by aql. But then we have al-maqulatul ashr, 10 categories or categories. When Muslims, brought this concept from Greek, so they use categories or categories in English. المقولات العشر is مقول يعني ما يقال في جواب ما هو. When we ask about what is mahiyya of something, what is something in its essence, these are the answers. Jawhar or 9 accidental categories. مقولات عرضية. متى، كم، كيف، أين، وضع، جدا، أن يفعل، أن ينفعل. These are 9 accidental categories plus jawhar become 10. Okay, they become 10. So al-maqulatul ashr all are related to what? al-mafaahim al-maahuwiyyah. al-maahiyyah imma jawharun or arazun. Araz has 9 types. Now you can understand that this type of mafaahim, of course mafaahim, we are talking about mafaahim kulli, explain boundaries of existence, because mahiyya is haddul wujud. In philosophy we have talked about the difference between wujud and mahiyya, and then we talked about asalatul wujud according to Mullah Sadra wa i'tibariyatul mahiyya. So you know the difference between wujud and mahiyya. Mahiyya is haddul wujud. Mahiyya is like a container. The shape of this container is fixed. Whether it is full or empty, it looks in a different shape. Existence is the reality that fills this container. Container is just the boundaries, yeah, just limits. But then existence takes these shapes and forms. So we have existence in the form of a human being. Now the container is a human being. Sometimes container is a horse, sometimes container is a flower, sometimes a fruit, sometimes it's stone, sometimes it's air. But wujud is the main thing. Without wujud, mahiyya is nothing. Al-maahuwiyyah min haythu hiya laysat illa hiya. Mahiyya in itself is nothing except itself. La mawjuda wa la ma'duma wa la ayy shay. Existence gives reality to mahiyya. So for everything, this is a very important point to understand the difference between this and the secondary ones. For every being outside, we have mahiyya. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wajibul wujud, has no mahiyya. Mahiyyatuhu an-niyyatu. Al-wajibu mahiyyatuhu an-niyyatu. His mahiyya is the same as his existence. So unlimited existence is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But for mumkinat, mahiyya is the limits, because they are limited beings. So if anything is outside, it has mahiyya. And for everything, there is only one mahiyya. You cannot apply more than one mafhum maahuwi to something outside. Only one primary intelligible can be applied to anything. Everything is just one. For example, it's insan, it's faras, it's baqar, it's hajar, it's shajar. Whatever it is, it's just one. Then we said we have secondary intelligibles, al-maqulatu thaniya. And when we say thaniya, means not primary. So it can be second or third or fourth. Anything which is not first, we say secondary. Okay, so for us then the rest is not important. Why we emphasize on being secondary? Because first of all, aql reflects on beings which are juz'i, which are particular, and abstracts from them مفهوم ماهوی as the first type of kulliyat. Then aql reflects further on this mafaahim and comes up with secondary intelligibles. For example, you see Zayd, Amr, Bakr. You say this is insan. There are few horses. You say these are horse. So horse is kulli, mafhum mahawi. Insan is mafhum mahawi. Then aql works on insan, on haywan, and says they are mumkin. So this is secondary. Or there is mafhum insan in mind, then aql says this mafhum insan is no or is kulli. These are ma'qul sani and mantaqi. Logicians and philosophers, in order to distinguish between functions of aql at two levels, they use two different terms. For the function of aql, when comes up with ma'qulat ula or mafahim mahawi or primary intelligibles, they use tajrid. This amaliyatu tajrid, this operation of aql is tajrid. What is tajrid? Tajrid means to separate. You see Zayd, Amr and Bakr. If you leave aside their particularities, their individual characteristics, if you leave them aside, you reach insan. Their height, their width, their weight, their shape, their color, even their gender. If you leave aside, then you have kulli of insan. This is called tajrid. But when you want to reach secondary intelligibles, like imkan, then they call it intizar. Amaliyatul intizar. Intizar is more complicated than tajrid. Tajrid is very easy. You leave aside their exclusive characteristics. Intizar needs more reflection, or we can say more intellection. It's a term which is used. Intellection. Ta'aqqul. Fi'lul aql. More intellection, so that you find that these are contingent, or these are ma'lul, these are effects, etc. So, after having mafahim mahawi or ma'qulat ula, aql continues reflection or intellection and abstracts yantazi'u. I use English, I use Arabic, so that you are familiar with the terminology in Islamic philosophy as well. Aql continues this process and comes up with secondary intelligibles. Now, these secondary intelligibles, or al-ma'qulat al-thaniya, we said are either applied to beings, external beings, or they are applied to mental beings. You are familiar with classification of existence into external being and mental being. Al-wujud al-khariji, al-wujud al-zihni. The things which are external, and when we say external, it can be inside us. External is opposite to zihn, not opposite to human being or human body or even human spirit. Sometimes we have things that their external existence is inside us. Yeah? So for example, your own mental images in حمل شایع, they are, for example, کیفیات نفسانیه. So they are existing inside us. So وجود خارجی doesn't mean outside human being. Means they are not of the nature of وجود ذهنی. Means they are not like concept which act as mirror. We are dealing with a being as such. So المعقولات الثانية الفلسفية, philosophical secondary intelligibles, are those that are abstracted by عقل and they relate to أنحاء الوجود, not حدود الوجود. حدود الوجود, limits or boundaries, was for ماهیة. Here we are talking about أنحاء الوجود, modes of existence, types of existence. For example, إمكان, to be contingent, is not ماهية, it's not maahuwi, but it's about the type of existence that we have. We have two types of existence. Either it's necessary or contingent. More than one mahiya can have imkan. Actually, we believe all mahiyat have imkan. No problem. But we said mafaahim maahuwi can only be applied to one, and every being has only one mafhum maahuwi. But mafaahim falsafi can be applied to many, and even one thing can have many mafaahim falsafi. For example, we can say this is mawjood. Mawjood as a mafhum is maqul thaniya falsafi. Mawjood is not mahuyat. Yeah, when we say something is a being, mawjood is mafhum thaniya falsafi. We say also it's mumkin. This is another maqul thaniya falsafi. We say it is ma'lul or illa. Again, it is another maqul thaniya falsafi. We say it is wahid, it is one. This is ma'qul thaniya falsafi. For example, we say bil fi'l, this is ma'qul thaniya falsafi. So one thing can have many secondary intelligibles. And secondary intelligibles also can be applied to many mahiyat, many quiddities, no problem. They explain anha al-wujud, not hudud al-wujud. They don't explain whatness. They explain how this being is with respect to different issues, like is it one or multiple, is it actual or potential, is it cause or effect, is it contingent or necessary. And then we have معقولات ثانية منطقية, logical secondary intelligibles. These are those universal concepts which our aql abstracts by reflecting on concepts which are in our mind. It's not about external being. When aql reflects on external beings, can come up with معقولات ثانية falsafi. But if aql reflects on the concepts which are in our mind and says these concepts are kulli or juz'i or jins or fasl or no or aradi, these are mantiqi, secondary intelligibles, which are logical. They can never be applied to anything outside mind. outside mind, you cannot say it is kulli, you cannot say it is jins, it is fast, it is no. Outside mind is not accepting any of these things. Now, we move on quickly to the part about tasdiq and qadiyya. We said ilm husuli is either tasawwur or tasdiq. Tasdiq is when you have a judgment, you have hukm, mawzu, mahmul, and then hukm as an action of the soul. You judge, you say either A is B or A is not B. Tasdiq has always a judgment. Without judgment, it's not tasdiq. If you have question whether Zayd is alim or not, this is not tasdiq. But if you say Zayd is alim or Zayd is not alim, this is tasdiq. This is a kind of affirmation. And this is when we need to understand how to verify the truth of this tasdiq, this affirmation. Tasawwur doesn't have truth or falsehood. Truth and falsehood don't apply to tasawwur. Yes? Even if you add them, for example, you say knowledge of Zayd about usul al-fiqh, but still doesn't accept truth or falsehood. Knowledge of Zayd about fiqh, even if Zayd doesn't have any knowledge about fiqh, but knowledge of Zayd about fiqh is not true or false, because you are not making any judgment. Without tasdiq, we don't have anything about truth or falsehood. So it's when we have tasdiq that we have truth or falsehood. Then we said we have different classifications for tasdiq. One is to classify tasdiq into tahlili wa tarkibi. Either it is analytic or synthetic. We said analytic means that when you analyze subject, you come to understand that it has this predicate. For example, you say every husband is a man. In definition of husband, we have a man who is married. So to be a man is part of the definition. So if you analyze subject, you understand mahmul, predicate. Or you say every father is a man, because father is a man who is a parent. Or every ma'lul has illa. What is the definition of ma'lul? If you analyze ma'lul, you understand that ma'lul is caused, so there must be a cause. This is tahlili. Tarkibi is synthetic, meaning that predicate has not come out of the mawzu or subject. Predicate is something new, additional to the concept of subject. Like for example, when you say al-insan or Zayd katibun. Kitaba, to be a writer, is not part of the definition of insan or Zayd. Zayd can be katib or not katib. It's not that when you analyze insan or analyze Zayd as an individual of insan, the concept of kataba is there. So this is tarkibi. If we say water is boiling at, for example, 100 centigrade, this is tarkibi, because in the definition of water there is nothing about temperature of boiling. Okay, this is tarkibi. We said also we have pasini and pishini. Pasini means a posteriori. This is when something needs experience. Something needs to use our senses and repeat our observation or sensation through mushahada or tajriba, observation or experiment, which have different, of course, meaning. Observation is you just watch and observe what is happening in the nature. Experiment is that you plan a setting, an environment in which with your decision certain things happen. You are not just an observer. You observe what you have managed to bring into your laboratory, for example. This is repeated observation of something that you have planned. So in any case, whether it's observation or experiment, then here the knowledge is pasini, means comes afterwards, means after his and tajribe, a posteriori. Sometimes it's pishini, means before, a priori. And as I told you, my very last point last session was the whole question goes back in Ma'rifat Shanasi. I'm not saying this is the only question, but the main question is whether we have synthetic a priori statements, something that gives us more information. It's synthetic, not just analytic. Gives us more information, new information. Predicate is not just coming out of the subject, and does not need experiment. This is what we need in philosophy, because in philosophy we cannot wait and depend on tajribe, on empirical knowledge. Empirical knowledge is very much subject to mistakes and limitations. We need something which is universal and should be through reasoning. So for philosophy, for logic, for mathematics, we need a kind of knowledge which is not based on experience, on experiment. Okay? So it means, do we have synthetic statements or sentences or affirmations which are a priori? Okay. Now, we want to make a very important point about one of the differences between those affirmations or those, you can say, statements. A statement is qadiyya, which is presentation or expression of tasdiq. Tasdiq takes place in our mind, but when we express it in the form of a statement, it is called qadiyya. Qadiyya can be in your mind. You say Zaydun katibun in your mind, or you can say it, or you can write it. Qadiyya can be qadiyya zehniyya or qadiyya mantuqe or maktube. But anyway, qadiyya is expression of hukm, an affirmation that you have in your mind. So the question is about the difference between qadayay pasini and pishini with respect to accepting exceptions. A priori propositions, they are only understood by aql, by reason. They don't need experiment. Therefore, they are results of reasoning. Any reasoning which is purely intellectual is always kulli. Please remember this. In section on burhan in logic, we say al-juz'iyyu la yakunu kasiban wa la muktasaba. Particular things cannot be leading and producing any rational information for us, which is kulli, or cannot be result of any rational reasoning, juz'iyat. For example, you can, even if you are the best philosopher of the world, or if you are a team of best philosophers of the world, you cannot rationally, only rationally, I mean purely, merely rationally, argue for something juz'i. For example, today is Tuesday. You cannot prove this philosophically. Or now it's cold or warm, or day or night here in this part of the world. You cannot prove this with intellectual discourse, because intellectual discourse is always kulli. And only kulliyat also can be used in this process, not juz'iyat. Therefore, either aql makes a judgment which is kulli, if it is purely aqli, it's kulli, or doesn't make a judgment, says, I don't know enough, I need more information, or this is not my area. For example, you ask aql about taste of ice cream. Aql says, I cannot make a judgment. I can use hiss, I can use the sense of tasting and come up with some understanding. But if you expect me just be aql without anything else, I cannot understand what is the taste. This is not, of course, a weakness for aql. No, this is not a weakness of aql. This is actually a strength of aql that doesn't go into juz'iyat, into details. For details, we have other things. In details, we can make mistakes, but aql is a hujjah. Aql shouldn't make mistakes. So aql remains where is possible to have certainty. In any case, intellectual propositions don't accept any exception. Any philosophical rule does not have exceptions. If there are exceptions, means this mistake. You cannot say, for example, sometimes some people who are not very much trained in philosophy, for example, they say there are areas that the principle of causality would not apply. For example, they say in nature there are things which are random and then there is no causality. Or for example, about human freedom, they say there is no causality. This is not acceptable. Causality is a rational principle. Every contingent being needs a cause, and this has no exception. It's impossible to have any exception for this. Nothing can happen without a cause, unless it is wajib al-wujud. Wajib al-wujud type of existence is different. It's not mumkin. We say kullu mumkinan lahu illa. We don't say kullu mawjudan lahu illa. So, if the proposition is intellectual, means it's something that does not depend on experiment, you can say it's a priori, then it would not accept any exceptions. But if it is empirical, if it's not a priori, it's passini, then the way we understand these things is that we observe, we experiment, we theorize, we hypothesize, we come with a hypothesis. For example, we say water boils in 100 centigrade. Then we find that, for example, when we go top of mountains, when the pressure is lower, maybe this 100 would be less. Or if, for example, there is more pressure, then boiling can be after rising 100 degree. So temperature, we realize that is a factor. So by seeing exceptions, we realize that the statement was not correct. It can be modified or it can be replaced with another theory, no problem. Because tajriba is always subject to exceptions and then modifications and further experiments and coming with further examples, counterexamples, and then you say, okay, to best of my knowledge, now this formula can explain natural factors in this field. But maybe then, even for example, if the laws of physics according to Newton were working in normal circumstances, then when we come to relativity, we realize that even that is not something which is absolute. In certain environments, then even laws of Newton may not work. So this is possible, this is not a problem. But there is no certainty here. In aql, there is kulliyya and there is certainty. Now, our main question starts with what is the reality of truth? حقيقة الصدق. What is the reality of truth? And you can now, inshallah, very well understand where is our concern. Our concern is about ilm husuli, not ilm huduri. In ilm huduri we don't have any issue because what is known is present for the knower. There is no chance of mistake. In ilm husuli we have problem. And then in ilm husuli we said in tasawwurat we don't have problem. In tasdiqat we have problem. So now we have to understand what is the truth or falsehood and how we can establish truth or falsehood. Aristotle used to say that first we should establish what is truth and what is falsehood. Falsehood is to say for something which exists, it doesn't exist. Or for something which doesn't exist, to say it exists. This is falsehood. Truth is to say to something which exists, it exists. To something which doesn't exist, to say it doesn't exist. So this is a basic understanding of truth and falsehood. But now we want to go further and assess this question of truth and falsehood. This question, as I said, is addressed by Aristotle, but even before Aristotle, by Plato, by Socrates, and even pre-Socratic philosophers, they have addressed this issue. Because it's a very fundamental issue for humanity, for human beings. It has been discussed in logic, but later in philosophy, and now after epistemology or theory of knowledge became an independent field of study, it's the central question of epistemology. This is the most fundamental issue that epistemology has to study. The main theory is correspondence theory. Look at these two sentences. Sentence A. The sun is larger than the earth. Sentence B. The earth is larger than the sun. These are two claims, yeah? One says sun is larger, says earth is larger. Maybe if someone has very limited knowledge, you say, okay, sun is small, so it's smaller than the earth. Earth is very big, we travel, we don't know where is the end of the earth. So but people with little science, they know that sun is much larger than the earth. So you don't accept one of those two sentences which says earth is larger. You say sun is larger than the earth and say this is true and the other one is false. So how did you attach truth and falsehood to these two? By checking these statements against reality. Yeah? You said the sentence which says sun is larger than the earth corresponds to the reality. Therefore it is true. The sentence which says the earth is larger than sun doesn't correspond to the truth, doesn't match the truth. It conflicts with the truth, so it is false. Okay? So, not only Muslim philosophers, but many of also other philosophers up to recent centuries, they always had this theory of correspondence as a way to explain truth and falsehood. So truth is correspondence to reality. So there is an independent external reality, and if our proposition corresponds to that, it is true. Otherwise, it is false. From late 19th century and then 20th century, some philosophers in the West, mainly, when they were faced with questions and challenges about establishing truth, establishing what is corresponding truth, they were not able to answer to some of the objections raised by some empiricists, etc. They try to solve the issue by changing the theory. Instead of saying that truth is corresponding to the reality, they said, for example, truth is a matter of cohesion, or truth is a matter of practical benefit, a kind of pragmatist approach to the truth. So they didn't manage to answer and solve the problem. They tried to somehow raise altogether the problem. Inshallah, we will talk about these theories. But as I said, the main theory has always been, sometimes as the only theory and sometimes as the main theory, is correspondence theory. The truth is a matter of correspondence to the reality, which is objective, which is external, which is independent from us. It's not a matter of what I wish. Sometimes you wish reality to be something else, but reality is what it is, whether you like it or not, whether you want it or not. There are two ways, or maybe two main ways, that Muslim philosophers have tried to establish truth of sentences without depending on empirical knowledge. This means that then philosophy is possible, theology is possible. We can have certainty. If it was just based on empirical knowledge, then we couldn't have certainty and we couldn't have really, purely intellectual philosophy or theology. I think maybe if I leave this for the next, inshallah, week. We have reached a very important part of the discussion, and that is about how foundationalists, like Muslim philosophers, are going to establish the certainty or correspondence of the sentence with the reality. What I want you to do for the next session, and inshallah I'm going to ask, is that you study different types of badihiyat, because this is very important part of our discussion. You know, in logic we say at-tasdiq imma badihiyun or nazariyun. You can say qadiyya, which is expression of tasdiq. Either it is self-evident or speculative, it needs argument. Then they say badihiyat are 6: awwaliyat, mashhudat, mujarrabat, hadsiyat, fitriyat, wajdaniyat. So I want you to write about 1,000 words about definition and examples for these badihiyat, and which of them we can really say they are badihi. They don't have any need for reasoning, because this is very important for our theory of foundationalism. So please write it, have it ready, and we will inshallah discuss first, and then I will discuss the next lesson inshallah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. If there are questions, we can take a few questions inshallah. You have also class. So okay, we have 3 questions, it seems, all from Mr. Husseini. How come a concept cannot be the subject of truth or falsehood? Tasawwur cannot be true or false, because tasawwur doesn't involve any judgment. So then, for example, you say Zayd or Kitabu Zayd. How can you say this is true or false? I didn't say Kitabu Zayd is mawjood or is not mawjood. I didn't say Kitabu Zayd is good or bad. I didn't say anything. I just said Kitabu Zayd, book of Zayd. So this is not possible to be truth or false. You abstract a concept from a particular case and only then start judging if it is true or false. That's evidence that before you judge, the same concept already points to something. Okay, I think it's the same thing. Mind is ontologically passive. Episteme breaks in before we even start actively reflecting and questioning its correspondence. Concepts have sources. They are true or false. Concepts, yes, they have sources in the sense that what is inspiring us, what is triggering us to develop these concepts. But concepts have no judgment. This is why if you study Amuzsh al-Falsafa, you see that, for example, Muslim philosophers may accept that when it comes to tasawwurat, we can accept that first tasawwurat start with tajriba. We don't have any problem with saying asalatul his in tasawwurat. This is not problem. Muslim philosophers, say man faqada hissan faqada ilma. Maybe the first thing we started to understand as tasawwur was hissi, when we saw people around us as a child, or smelled food, or etc., or touched. These are the sources of tasawwurat. But our focus is on tasdiqat. In tasdiqat, we are not asalatul hissi. In tasawwurat, no problem. Okay, I think you need to do mubahasa, inshallah. You have to really benefit from everything you studied in logic and philosophy, because our discussion here is very much dependent on your previous knowledge of logic and philosophy. It's good that you have such good questions, but you must certainly do mubahasa. Discuss with friends who have studied these subjects. share your ideas with each other. If any question remains unsolved, inshallah, then we can address. التماس الدعاء في أمان الله.